No, we're good. I think we're good.
Yeah, okay. Um, we have two sterling guests today. Lisa Urich from Plenty Bookstore in Cookeville, Tennessee, and we have Amanda Hall from Kepler's south of me in the Silicon Valley. And we even have Praveen who works alongside her. And so what we're going to discuss today, as you can tell from the messages you received, is nonprofit bookstores and hybrid nonprofit with profits. And lots of these two Sterling participants have prepared a deck, and there's a lot to learn. So we'll just start in. But Lisa, do you want to make any kind of opening statement before we include the deck?
Well, both an excitement. I'm excited to talk about this topic that has been something that I've joined a cohort thinking about for several years, and I'm also want to put a disclaimer that as much as I've learned that there's so much more to know. So it's a disclaimer and an invitation that if there are things that you know as we go through this, let's continue to be in community and to be building this book of knowledge around nonprofits. So
Cool. And then Sarah, would you please mute yourself? We could hear you talking. Amanda, do you want to make an opening gambit here?
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Hall. I've been a part of Kepler's since 2009 and part of Kepler's Reimagined since 2012. So I've been running a hybrid model for over a decade and have lots of thoughts on it. And I'm super proud of Lisa and Plenty for moving the needle. And I also agree, Lisa, that there's just a lot of different models and reimaginings out there. And I think we can all learn together.
So Lisa, if you want, I'll put your deck up and we'll get started. And then
yeah,
everyone should feel free to either raise their hand, hit the participant button saying you want to say something, or just even when you see a break, ask a question, because this is a conversation as well.
The good Praveen also added another standard disclaimer. None of us are attorneys, and we are not giving legal advice in this moment. Nor is this intended as a comprehensive overview of the subject. We're not academic researchers either. But what we are, with through Franklin Fixtures, where I get to see a dozen or so bookshops born every month and have been doing that for a decade, and through Plenty Bookshop, which is now a full 501(c)(3) nonprofit. And I've been on a quest and have learned a lot in that quest, not only about my own journey, but really a lot about or some about other people's journeys. And so we put together a deck of nonprofit possibilities prepared for bookshops, just intended as a repository of the accumulated knowledge that Amanda and I and Praveen is being quiet, but has really paved this way a lot. And I see we've got Will Greer on the line too, who's studying this subject a lot. So we've got a lot of people who are looking at this. But I've attempted to outline five nonprofit pathways that we've seen. So on the next slide, we look at all five of these pathways, I think. Um,
Well, yeah, hold on a
if you can
second.
get there. And I've kind of put them in categories so that we can think about the differences by category. Um, and as Steve, as you figure
Yeah,
that
for
out, I'll
some
go ahead and go
reason,
over them.
yeah, for some reason the deck is not showing up.
The
Hang
deck's not
on,
moving.
why is this? We may need you to put it up, Lisa.
Okay. I can
Not
share my
sure why.
screen.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's not coming up.
Here, I've got a request to share my screen if you like.
Yeah, let me stop my share, which is not working, and I'll get you on.
Okay.
Let's see.
Sorry about that, everybody.
Yeah, always
Okay.
tech problems.
So can we see now? Let's see.
Yeah, you should
I think we
be.
can see now. So the nonprofit possibilities in 5 ways, exploring the world of nonprofits. I've got 5 different categories, and really number 5 is a cheat because it's sort of a combination drawer of things. But the first one is the full nonprofit bookshop that qualifies for a nonprofit, a 501(c)(3), which is an IRS designation for either as a foundation or as a public charity. Typically, we'll go over that in a second, but a full nonprofit that's just a standalone as a bookshop. And then number 2, the full nonprofit bookshop that operates as a nonprofit under somebody else's 501(c)(3) umbrella, a fiscal sponsor, a partner organization that's not necessarily related to the bookshop. Number 3 is a full nonprofit bookshop that operates as part of an umbrella of another nonprofit, but it's a bookshop, kind of like a museum shop in a museum. And the fourth is the hybrid bookstore or bookshop and the nonprofit that operates side by side collaboratively, synergistically. And number 5 is a B corporation, which is not a 501(c)(3) usually, or but a recognized altruistic organization. I've also lumped co-ops into there, which are radically different than B corporations, but thought we could talk about those. Um, so the full nonprofit bookshop qualifying as a bookshop is what Jeff Deutsch was writing about in Praise of Good Bookstores. So he was advocating, and in that book, didn't seem to know about anybody that had qualified in that way. And I've been looking for that. So Plenty has been trying to um, qualify as a 501(c)(3) bookshop since its inception in 2022. We've operated under fiscal sponsorship until about 3 weeks ago when we got a 501(c)(3) designation. Now, we did an application, which is very exciting, but we did an application on the basis of nothing else, just being a bookshop, a community-oriented bookshop that does all the normal things that an indie bookshop does. So our reason for doing that is that we saw very few examples, or I couldn't find any other examples of people who had qualified in that way. It's possible that Redbud Books has, though I
No,
don't
I don't.
know. It's possible that Lakeside Books has, though I don't know for sure. It's possible that Underdog Bookstore has, though I haven't confirmed. These are things that I'm confirmed, but I know for sure that Plenty Bookshop was awarded, and they awarded it retroactively to our second application, which was in March of 2023. I know also that Lisa Swayze at Buffalo Street Books submitted on the same basis in April, and she has not yet received an award, but is hopeful to do that. So the qualification that we did use is that we were advised by a legal team that specializes in those things to be less commercial in our curation. So not to be differentiated from an airport store or a big box chain store. So we focused a lot on independent authors, I mean, independent publishers, on regional authors, and on texts that on making sure that the mix was such that only about 30% of our mix was considered like, you know, frontless commercial that you would find in some of those bookshops. And also that our merchandise is book centric. I'm always an advocate of saying I don't like the word sidelines anyway, but it suggests that it's not connected. But specifically to make sure that all of our other things didn't exceed 20% of the total, and that those things are all connected to book related quests. We also were advised to kind of take out the cafe element. We have a cafe, so we kept that separate. So those were the things that helped us qualify as a 501(c)(3. And now folks can give to us directly, and every purchase is in support of the bookshop and in support of the nonprofit. It's still a big education piece with the community because they're like, well, what's your nonprofit work? And it's like, this is it. You're standing in it and you're part of it. Um, and it's good news and bad news. It's planted in public soil. Every donation that we've made in terms of shelving or fixtures or financial, that all belongs. There's nothing that will come back out of that to to me or Dave or to Ashley as founders. It all belongs to this public entity now. So I think that's a really important thing. And there's a small board and an advisory board, and that's kind of how that one works. Amanda, what do you have you guys been thinking about this or for Kepler's or
Um,
is
Absolutely, Lisa. We think of Kepler's as community owned. It has been saved and supported by the community, and our current Kepler's 2020 project is that way. So we've always talked about community ownership. What that would look like is a bit up in the air. In exploring a full nonprofit model, you're right. One of the key things is that you're giving up ownership, that it becomes a nonprofit entity that's run and governed by a board, um, and there's no real ownership. The other thing that I thought was important in what you said was that the bookstore itself was the nonprofit activity. I firmly believe that the curation and the community that's built within the bookstore reaches that standard. So whether or not the IRS believes that, that's the case that needs to be made. So the points you brought up about commercial books or the percentage of revenue coming from different aspects, that's definitely something that needs more exploring. So a bookstore such as Kepler's, as a hybrid, the bulk of our revenue comes from the bookstore. So that's something we're still trying to sort out.
yeah. Yeah. So so this is the reason we did this. We really wanted to pave a path for folks like Kepler's, for City Lights, for other legacy bookstores that have been bookstores a long time in the quote unquote for-profit model, but have would love to be planted or have positioned themselves like you have in public soil and have said we really belong to the community. I've in the decade that I've done this and the people that I've taught, I have never met an independent bookstore or bookshop that wasn't purpose focused. Everybody that I meet is doing this for a larger purpose, and that may be the nature of the small bookshop enterprise. But I've not encountered anyone who was like, "Yeah, I'm doing this because I think it's a great way to make a lot of money," and it's not because so it
Hey,
really,
Lisa,
yeah,
I had
yeah,
a
yeah,
quick, I guess, point. Um, since if anybody who transitions to a nonprofit or sets up a nonprofit does have control over who the board is at the founding stage, that board then can bring other people on. But there is a sense of control in terms of choosing a board, a small one. I think Kepler says a small one. And so that, and you do too, so that, it's not just the total democracy.
yeah. Well, and you've been a long-term chair of Heyday Books, a nonprofit publisher, and it was interesting to me that you see plenty of not or several nonprofit publishers. You see nonprofits in the theater world, nonprofits in lots of others. There are 1.9 million nonprofits in the U.S. today, but bookshops as full nonprofits have not been traditionally recognized among them. So I think it's time for that to happen. And so that's number one. Let's move to number two. And I've got Mitch's lovely mug here. Mitch has been on StoryBrand and had a terrific interview a few months ago. This is a full nonprofit bookshop operating under fiscal sponsorship. And fiscal sponsorship is usually a short-term arrangement, a 1 or 2 years or months while you're transitioning or something. But I think that's most common. But Mitch and Books and Books have a long-term fiscal sponsorship arrangement with the studios of Key West. So they have been and they intend to stay in fiscal sponsorship, which is a form of collaborative operation for them. And so any 501c3 can be a fiscal sponsor. Typically, they charge for that effort and administration a 5 to 12%. We see 8%, fee for that sponsorship. So that means that the donations come in and then there's a fee assessed back to the fiscal sponsor, and the balance goes to the entity, the
But
operation.
but Lisa,
Yeah.
the percentage, I'm sorry to interrupt you. The percentage doesn't apply to your revenue as a bookstore.
Right. Only to the donations that are coming in.
Right.
That's a great point. Plenty Bookshop was under fiscal sponsorship from 2022 until just now when we got the 501(c)(3, and we were with the Biz Foundry in Cookeville, which is a business incubator. And they charged us $0 in terms, so we were able to say that every donor dollar came back to Plenty, and that was very gracious of them. I think they thought it would be 6 months, but it took us 3 applications. So, but I think that's an interesting model and a sustainable one with the right fiscal sponsor and partner, and really allowed Books and Books, if I understand Mitch right, to move from a long-standing bookstore to having this nonprofit work, and doing. And again, I'm working from my best knowledge, so I may say things that are not completely correct or nuanced. Um, the third one is, or any comment about that, Amanda? Anything you want to add to the fiscal sponsorship
I would just add
bit?
that it is a good transition opportunity. It is a way to put your toe in the water for nonprofit work, and see if there's community support, see if it's a good model. So yeah, I think it's a really good start.
Yeah. And Praveen, you've come off mute also,
Yeah.
so
So my understanding for Mitch's operation was slightly different, and even I'm not sure if I'm completely correct or not, is that the one project Mitch started with Judy Bloom in Key West, and that was the only one under fiscal sponsorship
oh,
and
maybe.
nonprofit. But the rest of Mitch's empire or mini empire in Florida and Miami and the multiple stores he has, I don't think those are under fiscal sponsorship.
Okay.
I think they're
Yeah,
just
I think you're right, Praveen. I think you're right.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. So I don't know many fiscal sponsor ongoing models. I know a few, and yeah, if you have questions or other things, put put them in the chat. Again, this is a cooperative learning exercise for us. Um, the next one, I know more about these, or I've seen this more very commonly, and that's a full nonprofit bookshop operating as part of an umbrella entity. And we saw this a lot with um, and thank you for what you dropped into the chat, Praveen. Um, and I forget how many bookshops Mitch actually has. You're right. There's something of an empire, including an airport store, which wouldn't be under fiscal sponsorship. So that's an important clarification. The third category is this full nonprofit bookshop operating as part of an umbrella entity. So many are selling new books and high-end book-related merchandise. One that I want to point out is More Than Words in Boston, which serves their umbrella organization is serving at-risk youth, and they employ at-risk youth in the bookshop and use the bookshop as the place that they help those youth find both reading and productive purpose and service and all the other things. So the mission is helping the youth, and the mechanism is the bookshop. Similarly, Hub City Books has an independent publishing. They publish about 35 books a year. They do a fantastic job of publishing, and they're a nonprofit, if I understand it correctly, as an imprint or a publishing, and they operate a bookshop as part of that. And then there's Bookmarks with Jamie Southern, who began as a community literary center and festival. She started a festival, and then the bookshop was born out of that festival. But the nonprofit, the 501(c)(3, came as a result of that festival. And the Bottom in Knoxville serves marginalized people. My understanding is that they are working in that way. The Berry Center in Kentucky, part of the work of the Berry Center. The Berry Center has been in existence for a while. Wendell Berry's legacy there and such good work. They have a bookshop that's falls in that. We see a lot of library foundation bookstores, like the one in South Bend, Indiana, where it's embedded in a library foundation. So, and then there are a lot of, I don't know, like I hadn't been familiar before I started searching with Periyati. I think that's how you say that name in Alaska, Washington, Buddhist teachings, mission with a bookstore or bookshop to disseminate. So this is an interesting pathway that has been well explored and is probably I think an easier pathway for some people who are clear about their mission or their particular interest, which is more easily identifiable as a 501c3, and then they put the bookshop component in with it. Thoughts about that, Amanda or Steve?
Yeah, I'm curious as to what I think it's Rebecca that's from RB Used is explaining in the chat about a Michigan cashless nonprofit. Rebecca, do you there? I don't. I guess
I,
we're not hearing.
well, I think what Rebecca's bringing up will come up in number 5,
Okay.
as part of the cashless nonprofit that that has the volunteers rescuing and redistributing books. That sounds very common to the number 5 category that I've got here,
Okay.
which is different than operating under an umbrella. Um, so and Praveen also notes that Mitch recently started Books and Books Literary Foundation, which is a separate project that would be more like a hybrid model. So we'll get to that in a moment. But this one is the umbrella entity, and the bookshop sits under it. So we're a museum and we have a museum store. It's that kind of synergistic. Amanda, any thoughts about that?
No, I was gonna say it's really that museum shop versus the museum concept. And again, I think it goes a lot to percentage of revenue, um, and or like the more than words. I mean, that's really just such a unique organization,
Mhm.
almost like a sheltered workshop. So it's just a very unique concept. But I think it's reflective. This whole list is just really reflective of the dynamic ways in which bookstores develop and support their communities,
Yeah, a lot of it, we've got 44th and 3rd on here, but they're reminding me that advocacy bookshops can come up kind of either way. They can come up here under an umbrella of their advocacy mission, marginalized or serving a population or a cause, which may be easily gotten or more easily gotten as a 501c3 or designated that way, and then pull up a bookshop under it and still meeting the guidelines. So going to number 4, and this one, I'll ask Amanda for you to take the lead in the hybrid, how this works, because you guys really led the way, at least in terms of a public understanding of the hybrid model.
Sure. Well, first, I think the most important aspect of this is we created the hybrid model so that we could make the bookstore more sustainable. So while we have a mission of engaging, enriching, inspiring, doing literacy work in Title I schools, bringing events, cultural, literary, informational, part of the nonprofit mission is also to support and make sustainable the bookstore. So the relationship that we have with the foundation and the bookstore is to some extent transactional. We are running 2 separate organizations, and those organizations have, their own P&L, their own staff, but the relationship is collaborative, supportive, and economical. I do think having this hybrid model has helped show our community, one, how complicated we can make things, but also that we are mission based, that we're here to support them.
Yeah. And it's a strong model, and story and song we had Donna Paz and Mark Kaufman on from Story and Song in Amelia Island, and they brought up their foundation, Literary and Arts Foundation, I believe, alongside, and they've received some big checks and some nice lift, and then the hybrid or the foundation buys books and sponsors events and does, and it's mainly books and events that are the income stream for the bookstore. Is that right?
The event revenue stream goes to the foundation.
Okay. So the
So
events
that
stream stays there. But events are often a big cost for bookstores and bookshops,
exactly.
and not a, we tell folks that, we did over 400 events last year, and there's no way we could do that on the back of the bookshop alone. And so this is amazing. Calvin was on StoryBrand, and he has King's English and Brain Food Books. So Brain Food Books serving indigenous populations, and so he could probably do an umbrella organization and go under that, but King's English has been long established, so it was easiest to bring along a side, a synergistic side partner in the form of a foundation. Charis Books in Atlanta, Page 158, Words, Fourth Act in Perry, New York, a Midtown Reader in Tallahassee, Florida. Parnassus is one that we've all heard, and Parnassus is to Elaine. I saw your question out of the corner of my eye, and we'll talk about that at the end. But Parnassus is a big revenue store. I mean, I don't know what their total revenue is, but I know they are a big revenue store, and they have the foundation alongside their store. So it might be difficult for them to transition. But Baldwin and Company has a foundation alongside. Um, by my count, we are at about 250 of these models across the US, and that seems high, and I may be wrong. So, but because I'm not a full-time researcher and I've got all these other things I'm doing, but this is what I've ascertained just in my counts. We know that it exists, and it exists in a strong way. And then the last one, before we kind of go to general conversation, is the B Corp. Um, and years ago, I worked on becoming a B Corp for Franklin Fixtures, which is a recognized altruistic organization. So you either have to be a C Corp or an S Corp structure to qualify as a B Corp. This doesn't give you any tax advantages, really. It's really about perception and joining a community of similarly minded altruistic organizations. But B Corp is an internationally known standard that says our organization exists for purposes bigger than profit. Um, and you have to go through a lot of hoops and a lot of application and some legal fees to get there. So we pursued that. There's also the co-op, which I've lumped in here. It's radically different than a B Corp. A co-op is collectively funded and owned and run. I don't know the structure of seminary co-op, but if I understood Jeff Deutsch in his book, I'm believing that it qualifies as a co-op. I know Buffalo City Books was founded in a co-op kind of way. So this is where the community comes together and funds it together. Um, and tell me what you know about co-ops and B Corps, Amanda. Have you known any
Um,
co-ops or
I mean, co-op
so?
is, I actually think seminary co-op went away from the co-op. Uh,
I mean,
and I would say,
Amanda, is it similar to, a co-op real estate arrangement in New York City where you basically have an entity and then people buy shares in that co-op?
yeah, definitely. It's cooperatively run by the employees who are cooperatively owning the space.
Yeah.
Jeff Deutsch moved seminary co-op into a technical nonprofit, but not a 501(c). It's a name, not a tax designation. Praveen can speak better to this.
Yeah, Praveen is going to talk after you're done.
Yeah. Go ahead, Praveen.
Yes, so yes, I think Amanda was right. There's actually two kinds of co-ops. There are employee co-ops in which a set of employees basically own the entity together and make joint decisions about it. And there's also consumer co-ops where a set of customers own the company and then they appoint a board of directors to kind of oversee the company. The seminary used to be a customer co-op, but after Jeff became the executive director years ago, he realized it had actually become very difficult to get decisions made because a lot of the old co-op members had moved away and they couldn't reach them. And so he actually moved it away from being a co-op. So I don't believe it's a co-op, anymore. The Buffalo Street Books, Lisa's operation was a customer co-op. It was very much started as by the customers from the beginning, and the customers put money into it in the form of shares and so on.
And we're going to have Lisa on in a future story brand to really unpack her story. But I think it's interesting because she decided that it was a little cumbersome to move forward and to really scale and build as a customer co-op, and has submitted the 501c3 as a full bookshop to try to make that. So it's very going to be very interesting to hear from her. And a co-op, to your point about an employee sponsored co-op, is different than an ESOP, an employee stock ownership organization. And we won't go into the weeds about that, but I've been working for 3 years to transition to an ESOP. And if you want to have an employee owned organization, you need to drop enough money to the bottom line to be able to afford it, because the legal fees are substantial. And you have to call for an IRS valuation to establish the stock price, which also is a substantial investment. And you want to do that at the right moment. And then you have to decide how much of the ownership you're going to transfer in the ESOP ownership, how much the organization can afford to transfer, and all of that. So that's another model that is often looked at. And I think what we're looking at in all of these are models that the public looks at as something bigger than a bookshop.
Lisa, do you want to
Yeah.
explain? You raised an interesting question that we talked about in a preliminary call with Amanda. Do you want to explain about the issue of the cost of conversion on one hand? And then on the other hand, we've talked a lot with Praveen and Amanda about the advantage, the revenue advantage of the hybrid model, which I assume there also we could probably make the argument for a mission and hybrid, in a pure nonprofit. But do you want to talk about, because some of these things are easy to achieve and some are harder. I'm sure people who are running bookstores now are wondering about that.
Yeah, the relative cost, and I'll open it for other comments. The 501c3 for us involved legal help and fees. It doesn't have to. People do those by themselves all the time, but we were not successful by ourselves the first 2 times. And so the third time we were fortunate to have the help of a legal organization that specialized in nonprofits. And so they gave us some advice and really helped us craft the thing. So that was the primary cost. And as Amanda pointed out, anything else that you've put into it now belongs to the entity. So for folks who have put, if you've got an SBA 7A, for instance, as a part of your bookshop, then you've collateralized your home and all other things that you personally own. If you transitioned the bookshop into a 501c3, now all of those assets potentially could flow along with the loan into that nonprofit, which is, so there's all kinds of legal issues there. But the 501c3 by itself doesn't necessarily cost a lot to get into. But the bookshop as part of a 501c3 umbrella is just a new initiative built in. So that's not a high cost model. Bookshop under fiscal sponsorship, that depends on the sponsor and what they're charging for the donations. But that is not, the barrier to entry is not a financial one, I don't think. How about the bookstore and nonprofit, the hybrid collaboration? What's the cost of entry to doing that, Amanda and Praveen? Yeah.
I mean, I would say there's some legal and accounting things to sort out, and obviously just operationalizing everything. I mean, your chart on the next slide over, does talk about, we do have 2 sets of books. We do have, but we have a little bit more shared leadership. I work both for the bookstore and the foundation. We share and support with staffing. But I think the biggest difference is that with the hybrid model, the foundation is one of the bigger vendors to the bookstore. So I think there was a question in the chat earlier. All of our event books are sold by the bookstore. And because we ticket, that ticket revenue for those books then gets paid back to the bookstore from the foundation. And the foundation rents space to put on events in the bookstore. So that's a new revenue stream.
Yeah. This comparative chart kind of looks at these five structures, which is really six structures, um, and and federal tax implications. I didn't fill it in for the bottom two, but the standalone nonprofit is not taxed on its earnings. Its profits get folded back. It's a statement of activity, and the profits fold back into the enterprise. And if there are any, what's left over, I don't know if it's actually profits, but what's left over after you've paid all your expenses gets folded back and into the work. You can have volunteers, which is nice. It does, I say restrictive, yes, in the sense that I believe that should we be audited, they're going to be looking at the level of commercial activity and kind of weighing us as that we're doing the things we said we would do in our 1023. Are there fees that we have to pay? No. The complexity is in terms of a board. We keep our board really small. Our decision-making board is 4 people, but our larger advisory board, which also gets financial statements, is 28 people. So they see the financials, they see our major initiatives. They're divided into 4 different action teams, but that can be complex. And under the umbrella bookshops, there are, they're not taxed on earnings. You can have volunteers. There are restrictions, fees to others. That depends. There are boards. Fiscal sponsorship, again, no tax on your earnings necessarily, and you can't have volunteers. There would be some restrictions. The fiscal sponsor would receive some fees, and the complexity, I think that depends on the sponsor. We looked at getting a sponsor of our PBS station, but they were going to charge not an exorbitant amount, but it was going to be 7%, and there was going to be a lot more administrative burden. So that's how we walked to the business foundry. And the bookstore and the nonprofit side by side. How do you handle taxes, Amanda? How, there's tax implications and such. You pay them on the bookstore side, and
they're completely separate organizations. So the
yeah.
bookstore just pays sales tax and income tax if there was income.
Yeah.
Praveen, do you have anything else to say?
Yeah. And importantly, so does a nonprofit pay sales tax right now. It depends on the state, and the state has and federal, yeah.
Lisa, I have a question. You referred to my chairmanship of Heyday Books, which is a nonprofit. And I've been on the board and chairs of other nonprofits. It's very expensive in California or New York to do the annual audit that the Attorney General requires of nonprofits. There's these organizations you pay, and I'm curious whether that's going to apply to you or it applies to the foundation that Amanda and Praveen have. I mean, we spend $10,000 a year on an audit at Heyday Books, which is really insanely stupid.
Yeah. So that's a full audited financials or reviewed financials.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's required in California, I believe.
Wow.
Of all nonprofits. They're very tough about
No,
nonprofits.
it's a certain size. You have to be above a certain size to
That's right. Over 2 million, I think, right?
have a mandatory audit. Yeah, even Heyday used to be under 2 million, and then they were not required to do an audit.
Yeah, which dropped us below 2 million. No.
And that is, that's true of most other organizations too, that the banks have protocols that when you reach a certain financial threshold, they want you to at least have reviewed financials, if not audited financials. Reviewed is usually sufficient up to a certain point, but it's a great note. In Tennessee, for a bookshop our size, we won't have to have those, but we probably will do budget for and do reviewed financials at least every 3 years, just so that our board and other people know that we're being fiscally responsible. And we've seen some nonprofits that have done nefarious things and misused funds, so I think that's a piece of public transparency that's important to note and budget for. So, but
The other
it's
thing, I just wanted to mention, which we sort of touched on already, is we did a separate discussion about Kepler's hybrid model, and one of the advantage of that is again that you can not only generate donations, but there's a lot you can do in terms of including the overall profitability of the two organizations, or the combined hybrid, if you will, that we won't go into now, but maybe when I share this nearly encyclopedic report that Lisa's done. I was thinking about how intimidated people must feel right now about asking questions. Um,
easy.
it's
I've just touched it.
fantastic. Yeah, Amanda and Lisa. But anyway, maybe I'll include a link to that session as well, so you can see what the advantages of the hybrid model are in terms of profitability, not necessarily revenue.
Let's open for questions and see what folks are curious about that we've talked about, because we've talked about all 5 or 6 models, um, and I don't know again how much we'll be able. I just know that when we look at sustainability and we look at the importance of bookshops in the world, we want to make as many pathways as possible for people to do this work. And it's a heavy lift. We've talked about it before, heavy carry costs in terms of inventory. Um, Turns are difficult. So, that's a thing. So Lisa's asking, is there any concern with 501c3 selling political books given the current environment? We were sent, there's the interesting thing about a 501c3 application, as I understand it now, is that each application is its own thing. It's uniquely reviewed, and there aren't any like do this, or there aren't any real there's no real transparency about the decision making as to what, like why it was rejected or on the basis of what it would be considered. So we did not put political books per se, and we in our 2023. I can only speak to the one that we did, and that's because we don't
Lisa, do
typically
you
carry
mind
them.
stopping the screen share? Somebody asked if you could take the deck down.
I'm trying to,
I
but
believe you're sharing it. I'm
yeah,
not.
I've got share, and I did try to do that. Let's see. I don't know how to do that. You can probably stop me from sharing as a host, but
This
I
will
can.
stop others sharing. Yeah, let's see if that works. Did that
I'm going
work?
to say,
No.
No.
um,
You can slide the deck to the left to make the screen much larger. There's a dividing line in the middle where you put your cursor over it and you just move it to the left on Zoom. Let's see if we can get rid of this, though. I can't figure out
okay.
why.
I just put host only, so I'm going to let you see if you
Okay.
can get
Yeah.
me
Okay.
unshared.
Okay.
So, um, yeah, I've been trying that, Amanda. But yeah, we get plenty because of our location in an 82% very red world. We on purpose don't carry a lot of political books, so that didn't come up. I'm curious as what would happen if you said, but I also know that if that other organizations have qualified as 501c3s as advocacy organizations who do carry a lot of political books, because they're advocating a certain position or group of people. So I know it's happened and been done with political books in the mix. Any other comments about that? I mean, Amanda or
I
Praveen,
mean,
any
I
thoughts
would
on that?
I would just say that as we talk about, as Kepler's has talked about moving to a nonprofit model, mix of inventory and oversight of that has been a question. If we believe that we're informing and providing knowledge and resources, the ability to walk in other people's shoes by the books we sell, then that would be overly burdensome to have IRS designation in which they suggest that we could not sell those political books. Now, I know as a nonprofit, we can't make political statements and we can't support or, politics, but I think the level of a political book, that would be another discussion, I think.
Yeah. I mean, technically, any book can become political. I mean, Charlotte's Web is a
Yeah,
political
I mean,
book
look
in
at all the
our world. Yeah,
banned
it's
books.
from the book bans.
Exactly.
So, but and in our present political environment, I'm seeing some extraordinary things in terms of restrictions and loyalty and those kinds of things. But I do know, and I'm encouraged by the fact that the bottom booksellers, 44th and Third, others who have qualified with nonprofits that are very much espousing a political view that is not that of the president. so, so, so that can happen is really still is something I'm grateful for. Other
Any
questions?
other questions? Looking.
We, while we're talking, the exciting thing about being a nonprofit is the education piece that we're getting to do with everybody, because when they realize, because just like you, Amanda, I mean, you say, this is our bookshop. This is ours. So people will say, are you the owner? And I say, I'm the founder, or one of them. I'm one of three founders. So, and I try to do that not as a correction, but as a gentle, it's even better. I'm a founder, and it's your bookshop too. So this idea of shared ownership, I think, especially for those of us who are community building and community focused, is really important and makes this make a whole lot of sense.
Very good.
Yeah. Praveen?
Praveen, do you have a question, or is somebody
Yeah,
else?
I do. So I thought I'll just get the Q&A started because I have so many questions myself. So Lisa, I'm really curious in your application for Plenty, you talked about the importance of curation and keeping the commercial curation under 30%. Were you also able to take advantage of the fact that I believe you're in a book desert kind of a location with the very low literacy rates and not many book readers and not many other bookshops and so on and so forth. So just the environment in which you're trying to bring this bookshop, what was that a factor that helped you, or were you able to take advantage of that also or not?
We definitely included it as context for the importance of a bookshop. And we know that the Publishers Weekly reported research that only about 16% of people are reading for pleasure today in America. Our reading levels have slipped again at national levels for the eighth year in a row. We have less than 2% of families reading regularly with their children. These are all national statistics that all of us can use. And so we definitely leaned into those, as well as the fact that we have, in Tennessee, we struggle with children's reading. We struggle with adults reading. We struggle with reading levels. And we don't have other book shops and book it's hard to say we don't have book access, because I really believe we do, and we didn't include that. It's not a true book desert. And yet, we have Dolly's Imagination Library, and my particular county is the lowest user of the Imagination Library in the state. So here, parents are being offered free books every year for the first 5 years, and not taking advantage of those free books. So we didn't frame it as an environment where people don't have books, but people don't care about books or consider them part of the essential. Um, Also, as a developmental psychologist, my bias is that and belief is that books facilitate every developmental milestone. So, including eating, crawling, and walking. That books and reading are important neural pathways. So I used national kinds of things, again, trying not to be too granular, but to really look at the case for the rural bookshop in America. I did frame us as rural, so which I think is easy to do. Um, and
We
we're,
should
we're
at some point do. We've never really touched on banning of books or the political nature of a tax on libraries and bookstores, but at some point we should do a story brand about that issue.
It's really the nice thing, the beautiful thing about being a nonprofit 501c3 that I love best about this designation is that I've completed 3 grant proposals this week, um, in collaboration with our library and with our public schools and with another individual who has another initiative that I want to be part of and build on. So the potential for collaboration, nonprofit to nonprofit, is really cool. And the more we raise the level of awareness, the more I'm seeing people change their buying habits. I've gotten the hospital, which is a nonprofit, to change from buying from Amazon to think about buying from us. And for all of those books that they take into the hospital rooms when somebody needs a read or a Sudoku or something, they're pulling out of the activities closet. I've been able to persuade our PBS station and our Empower organization, which is working with poverty families, to stop buying books from Amazon and buy from us. And as a nonprofit, we're able to build those partnerships um, more readily. It feels like it feels like that's open, and importantly, our staff seem to understand it better. We've had some staff that were really uncomfortable standing in fiscal sponsorship. They felt like they were having to explain away something, or it's like, we're not trying to trick you. We really are a nonprofit, and importantly, we chartered with the state as a nonprofit from day one. So being having a nonprofit charter at the state doesn't mean anything from a federal tax standpoint, but it was meaningful for us to be able to hold that up and say we're in a nonprofit charter with our state as we were established. And so that was a really good thing.
Yeah,
Um,
Lisa,
yeah.
also one small advantage I think Kepler's and others benefit from it, whether it's hybrid or nonprofit, is if I'm charged for an author event and it's a profit-making entity, I'm going to like, wait a minute, you're promoting, your book and the
Right.
author. If it's a nonprofit, I'm going to think, oh, I need to support them by paying for the ticket. So I think that's one. I think that's reflected probably in other kind of activities.
Elaine, are you able to come off mute and speak? Because I'm so excited. I reference city lights all the time and think about city lights all the time. So I love that you're on the call and some of your comments in the chat. Anything you want to add to what we've been doing here?
And John, do you mind muting yourself and anybody else who has got noise going on in the background? Can you mute yourself? We're hearing somebody.
Okay.
Hi, thanks. I'm sorry. I know I'm putting in these lengthy things into the chat.
I'm so appreciative. I'm excited. Yeah.
I almost didn't attend because I've attended a number of these kind of presentations where the word nonprofit gets thrown around, and I've felt a little pissed off about it over the time. And I love Jeff, and I love his mission. But when I would go to these sessions, and it would be like, okay, but that store is not nonprofit, you know. Sure, they're doing what I'm doing, which is like, yeah, you can make a case for events and programming. That's not so hard. I mean, it isn't simple to get a nonprofit status, but it's not so hard to make that case. But a commercial entity being a nonprofit. So yours is the first news I've seen, and it's kind of astonishing because I feel like whenever I try to plot this for us, I look around and I'm like, I just don't see it. And I don't see when it's going to happen. So it's great news that you were successful. I think I think everybody already knows this, but the devil's in the details, and truly, like, Satan lives in those details because it takes a long time to work through all this stuff. And I've looked into every possible. I'm curious, and then we could do it in a separate communication about like how you establish what is deemed so-called commercial as opposed to non-commercial curation, because that's a very subjective line too. I could say our whole store is non-commercial, but then if you pointed to one or two things that actually are quote unquote bestsellers, maybe that's not true. Um, I think I'd like to go back to, I posed a question in the beginning. I didn't want to interrupt everything with it, but I think it's important too, because I've talked to other people who, I don't want to name names, but seem to fly under the radar as a nonprofit. because their revenue stream is small. And so they managed to like run a little bookstore under the umbrella of their nonprofit, you know, other side of things, which is their events programming and their community stuff. Um, City Lights is obviously a big store. We have a lot of business. We don't necessarily have a lot of profit, but we have a lot of business. So it would be sort of like what Steve is talking about with Heyday. Once you get to a certain level, the scrutiny is different. And that's what I'm curious about, if your legal team had anything to say about that
Mhm.
level of like, I'm not asking about, what is the level you're doing business at, but I'm just wondering, how a bigger store builds from something. I'm not familiar with your place, so I don't know how big or small it might be, so I'm sorry about that.
We're on the smaller side, so we're well under 1 million in sales annually. So that um that helped, I think, or at least the legal team felt like that helped. That we were, you know, on that smaller side, the 500,000, 600,000 in revenues, um, gross revenues, because the bigger size, I think, gives a different level of scrutiny. Now, that is an opinion based on the feedback I got from the legal folks, and what they said is they don't know. And I am happy to share our 1023 because I did it with the very hope of paving the way for others. But I think, Elaine, you raise a really important point that that size matters and adds to a level of difficulty. I also think, just thinking about City Lights and about the social impact and about the poetry and about the all of the history and the other things, I think there are some other strengths in the application that might might help it over that hump. But those are all mights and possible things. So, what I know for sure is that this happened one time, and maybe it's happened other times. I'm anxious to know if it's happened other times and to pool our 1023s and see if we can start to make some pathways that are useful for each other. That's the very purpose of what we've been about, and of putting this in front of you guys today, is to say, here's what we know so far, and try to create a repository of knowledge here. So thank you for the questions and the work that you're doing toward it.
Well, I think we'll find a way in the follow-up, which will include, as I said in the chat, the recording and the transcript from this call, and maybe a little bit about Kepler's that we did in two different sessions, to offer some other advice. I think the thing to think about too, Lisa and Amanda and Praveen, is how in the world is separate entrepreneurs, nonprofiters, we can also interact with individually with people and help them out, because you've created a terrific, you're like the center in football. You've broken through the line, Lisa. But the question is, how do people follow that whole, how do we help them follow?
Well, I think we've got some terrific functional models out there to learn from, and some wonderful things that have happened. And thank you, Keplers, and Praveen and Amanda, for all the work that you've been doing in elevating. Really, you're the reason I know about this conversation and really even thought about it in the first place. So, um, and I think that's true for an awful lot of people. So thank you for your leadership in that.
Well, and we would be remiss with Praveen, if we didn't mention that what the nonprofits hybrid model also gives them is more power to try and build a living wage for their employees,
Yes.
which is the mission of Kepler's.
Yes.
You
So.
know. Okay, well, thank you all, and lots of more overloading information coming to you all shortly. Should be out.